Okay, everyone, thank you for joining us for Kibroth-hattaavah Part 2. Hope that y'all would have been blessed by Kibroth-hattaavah Part 1. So we're essentially going to continue right where we left off from Kibroth-hattaavah Part 1. So we saw in Kibroth-hattaavah Part 1 that if we want to follow Jesus into the most holy place of the heavenly sanctuary and have him cleanse us from all our sins, we have to afflict our souls, right? Now, ended last time by saying that this also involves our diet, right? So let's gonna go deeper into this now. Let's try Ezra chapter 8 and verse 21. Let's read what that says.
Then I proclaimed a fast there at the river Ahava, that we might afflict ourselves before our God, to seek him a right way for us, and for our little ones, and for all our substance.
All right, thank you for that, Sister Warren. Now, do we see here that fasting is involved in afflicting the soul? Yes, most definitely. So, do we see therefore that afflicting of soul involves our diet? Yes. Now, question: can anyone abstain from food from 1844 to the coming of Jesus? No, well, that's impossible, right? So, therefore, the fast here must be a symbol of something, right? Now remember, the fast was a shadow of things to come and the substances of Christ, as per Colossians 2:17. A symbol of what? How are we to fast today? Right? Now, when in doubt, look to Jesus. I don't think we can go wrong with that one. Right? Let us look to Jesus. Let us do this by looking at Matthew chapter 4, verses 1 to 4. All right, Matthew chapter 4, verses 1 to 4.
Then Jesus was led up of the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted of the devil. And when he had fasted 40 days and 40 nights, he was afterward and hungered. And when the tempter came to him, he said, If thou be the Son of God, command that these stones be made bread. But he answered and said, It is written, Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God.
Thank you. Now, Jesus is saying here that it is written. So my question is, where is it written? Right? It is actually written in Deuteronomy chapter 8, verses 1 to 3. That's where Jesus was quoting from. So let's go there.
All the commandments which I command thee this day shall you observe to do, that you may live and multiply and go in and possess the land which the Lord sware unto your fathers. And thou shalt remember all the way which the Lord thy God led thee these 40 years in the wilderness, to humble thee and to prove thee, to know what was in thine heart, whether thou wouldest keep his commandments or no. And he humbled thee and suffered thee to hunger, and fed thee with manna, which thou knewest not, neither did thy fathers know, that he might make thee know that man doth not live by bread only, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of the Lord doth man live.
Right. Now, does Jesus quote verses out of context? No, absolutely not, right? Now, are we seeing here that Jesus is making a parallel between fasting and the manna? Yes. Now, if Jesus is making the parallel, then we also have to make the parallel, right? Since he doesn't quote the verse out of context. So let's go back to the manna episode, shall we? Right? Let's go back there. Now, you see, just to set up the context, right? After taking the children of Israel out of Egypt, one of the first things that God did was to change their diet from one of flesh to one of manna, right? So now let's go to the book of Numbers. Numbers chapter 11, verses 4 to 6.
And the mixed multitude that was among them fell a lusting, and the children of Israel also wept again, and said, Who shall give us flesh to eat? We remember the fish which we did eat in Egypt freely, the cucumbers and the melons, and the leeks, and the onions, and the garlic. But now our soul is dried away. There is nothing at all beside this manna before our eyes.
Thank you. Now, did the people take kindly to this change that God wanted to give them? Not at all, right? They wanted meat, right? And they tried to play smart too, mixing in cucumbers, leeks, and onions, right? But let us see how God responded to this. Numbers chapter 11, verses 18 to 22.
And say thou unto the people, Sanctify yourselves against tomorrow, and you shall eat flesh. For you have wept in the ears of the Lord, saying, Who shall give us flesh to eat? For it is well with us in Egypt. Therefore the Lord will give you flesh, and you shall eat. You shall not eat 1 day, nor 2 days, nor 5 days, neither 10 days, nor 20 days, but even a whole month, until it come out of your nostrils, and it be loathsome unto you, because that you have despised the Lord which is among you, and have wept before him, saying, Why came we forth out of Egypt? And Moses said, The people among whom I am are 600,000 footmen, and thou hast said, I will give them flesh, that they may eat a whole month. Shall the flocks and the herds be slain for them to suffice them? Or shall all the fish of the sea be gathered together for them to suffice them?
So God saw through it and he knew that it was meat that they really wanted, right? That's why in verse 22 he asked, Shall the flocks and the herds be slain for them, or shall the fish of the sea be gathered for them? Because it was exactly meat that they wanted. Now, let us now look at Numbers 11, 31 to 34.
And there went forth a wind from the Lord, and brought quails from the sea, and let them fall by the camp, as it were a day's journey on this side, and as it were a day's journey on the other side, round about the camp, and as it were 2 cubits high upon the face of the earth. And the people stood up all that day, and all that night, and all the next day, and they gathered the quails. He that gathered least gathered 10 homers, and they spread them all abroad for themselves round about the camp. And while the flesh was yet between their teeth, ere it was chewed, the wrath of the Lord was kindled against the people, and the Lord smote the people with a very great plague. And he called the name of that place Kibroth-hattaavah, because there they buried the people that lusted.
Kibroth-hattaavah again, right? Name of our study comes up once again. So God gave the people what they wanted, then destroyed them. So they lusted after flesh. All right. Now, let's go now to the New Testament. Let's now go to 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 6 to 11.
Now these things were our examples, to the intent we should not lust after evil things, as they also lusted. Neither be you idolaters, as were some of them. As it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink, and rose up to play. Neither let us commit fornication, as some of them committed, and fell in 1 day 23,000. Neither let us tempt Christ, as some of them also tempted and were destroyed of serpents. Neither murmur ye, as some of them also murmured and were destroyed of the destroyer. Now all these things happened unto them for ensamples, and they are written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the world are come.
Now, do we see here that the experience of the children of Israel with the manna in the wilderness was to teach us something? Yes. Now, I wonder, who are those upon whom the end of the world are come? It's going to be us today, right? Oh, still dealing with the manna. Let us now turn to Hebrews chapter 9, and we're going to read verse 4.
Which had the golden censer and the ark of the covenant overlaid round about with gold, wherein was the golden pot that had manna, and Aaron's rod that budded, and the tables of the covenant.
Right, thank you. So that's talking about the contents of the most holy place, right? Now, what do we see here was in the Ark of the Covenant, in the most holy place, in the sanctuary? A pot of manna. Why? You see, just as how God gave the children of Israel manna to change their diet from meat when they are following Him in the wilderness, when we are following Christ in the most holy place, He is once again giving us manna. I wonder what's the lesson He's trying to teach us. Could it be the same lesson He was giving the children of Israel? All right. So, if Jesus made a link between fasting and the episode with the man, where He was trying to get them off meat, then how should we fast today? Well, we should fast by abstaining from flesh, right? It seems a reasonable thing to say, right? So, if we are following Jesus in the most holy place, then what should our diet be? Flesh free. Our diet should be flesh free if we are following Jesus in the most holy place. So you see, our reason for not eating meat at Seventh-day Adventists didn't come solely from the writings of Ellen White, but from a careful study of the Bible. See, this is why the prophet can say the following. Let's go to the screen. All right, let's read what this says.
It is impossible for those who give the reins to appetites to attain to Christian perfection. The moral sensibilities of your children cannot be easily aroused unless you are careful in the selection of their food. Many a mother sets a table that is a snare to her family. Flesh, meats, butter, cheese, rich pastry, spiced foods, and condiments are freely partaken of by both old and young. These things do their work in deranging the stomach, exciting the nerves, and enfeebling the intellect.
That comes from Christian Temperance and Bible Hygiene. Right. Right. So what is at stake here? The attainment of Christian perfection or the cleansing from all sin. All right. Now, how possible is it to attain Christian perfection if we continue to eat flesh? Impossible. Right? That's what the prophet says, right? All right, let's go to the screen again. All right, Counsels on Diet and Food, page 58, paragraph 1. Let's read what this says.
Our habits of eating and drinking show whether we are of the world or among the number whom the Lord, by his mighty cleaver of truth, has separated from the world.
All right. So, in other words, your diet determines whether you are of the world or following Jesus in the most holy place. Now, let's turn to Leviticus chapter 23 and verse 29.
For whatsoever soul it be that shall not be afflicted in that same day, he shall be cut off from among his people.
Right. So those who did not afflict their souls on the Day of Atonement, they were cut off from God's people, right? So what happened to those who did not fast? They were cut off from God's people. Now, remember that this is a shadow of things to come. Remember Colossians 2:17? Now, what is the cutting off from God's people seen here a shadow of? Let's find out. Let's go to the screen again. Counsels on Diet and Food, page 382, paragraph 1.
Greater reforms should be seen among the people who claim to be looking for the soon appearing of Christ. Health reform is to do among our people a work which it has not yet done. There are those who ought to be awake to the danger of meat eating, who are still eating the flesh of animals, thus endangering the physical, mental, and spiritual health. Many who are now only half converted on the question of meat eating will go from God's people to walk with them no more.
All right, now, interesting paragraph there. Now, a few questions arise from that. What does it mean to be half converted on the question of meat eating? Well, you might not eat chicken and beef, but you might eat fish, right? Or you might agree intellectually that eating meat is wrong, but you still eat meat now and then, or when you go out, right? Now, do we see here that those who continue to eat flesh will be separated from God's people at some point in the future? Yes. You see, if you can't give up a piece of meat for Jesus, what makes you think you're going to risk ridicule, jail, or even death for him when that time comes? All right? Think about that. If we as Seventh-day Adventists continue to consume flesh, we will end up taking the mark of the beast and be separated from God's people, right? Now, this sounds like a strong statement, but is it biblical? Let's see. Now, what reason did the Bible give earlier for abandoning flesh foods? To attain Christian perfection or the overcoming of sin. Let's turn our Bibles to Revelation chapter 3 and verse 5.
He that overcometh, the same shall be clothed in white raiment, and I will not blot out his name out of the book of life, but I will confess his name before my Father and before his angels.
All right, now we look at the context from the previous verse, right? Now, it is he that overcometh sin that is not blotted out from the book of life, right? So therefore, who is blotted out? He that did not overcome sin, right? Now, let's now turn to Revelation 13 and verse 8.
And all that dwell upon the earth shall worship him, whose names are not written in the book of life of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world.
Right, thank you. Now, from what we see here, who worships the beast when the time comes? Those whose names are not in the book of life, right? Now, if your name is not in the book of life, either it was never written there, or it was written there and was blotted out, right? Now, whose name is blotted out of the book of life from what we looked at before? Those who did not overcome sin, right? Or those who didn't attain to Christian perfection. Therefore, those of us who didn't overcome sin will end up worshiping the beast when that time comes, right? Now, let's put this all together. If not giving up flesh foods causes you to not overcome sin, and not overcoming sin causes your name to be blotted out from the book of life, and your name not being in the book of life means you worship the beast, then what can we conclude? Well, the only thing one could conclude is that if we don't give up flesh foods, we will end up worshiping the beast and be cut off from God's people. Have mercy. You see, they did not overcome sin. And when the Sunday law test comes, they will be blotted out from the book of life and shaken out of God's church. All right. Now, let's go back to Hebrews. Hebrews chapter 9, verses 3 and 4.
And after the second veil, the tabernacle, which is called the holiest of all, which had the golden censer and the ark of the covenant overlaid round about with gold, wherein was the golden pot that had manna, and Aaron's rod that budded, and the tables of the covenant.
Thank you. Now, based on what we just saw, right? Does it make more sense now why there's a pot of manna in the most holy place in the ark with God's commandments? Yes. Let's go back now to Deuteronomy chapter 8, verses 1 to 3, and develop more on this point here.
All the commandments which I command thee this day shall you observe to do, that you may live, and multiply, and go in and possess the land which the Lord sware unto your fathers. And thou shalt remember all the way which the Lord thy God led thee these 40 years in the wilderness, to humble thee, and to prove thee, to know what was in thine heart, whether thou wouldest keep his commandments or no. And he humbled thee, and suffered thee to hunger, and fed thee with manna, which thou knewest not, neither did thy fathers know, that he might make thee know that man doth not live by bread only, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of the Lord doth man live.
Right. Thank you. The manna episode that we saw in Numbers 11 was a test to see whether the people would keep God's commandments or not. That's what we just saw there, right? Now, what is the national Sunday? Well, when you really look at it, it is a test to see if we will keep God's commandments or not. All right, even under duress, right? Therefore, the manna or the flesh-free diet will be a key determinant in the test of whether we will keep God's commandments or not, or the national Sunday law. Right? All right, well, I can hear somebody say, well, what about Leviticus 11? The Bible talks about clean meats that we can eat, right? Right? Or someone will say, well, Jesus ate fish, and Jesus is my example, so I'm going to eat fish, right? Now, from our study of the sanctuary, answers to these questions should become quite apparent, right? Now, question. Were the children of Israel in Leviticus 11 living in the antitypical Day of Atonement? No, right? Therefore, they did not have to afflict their souls, right? Now, question again. Where was Jesus in his sanctuary ministry when he ate the fish? In the outer court, right? Because he hadn't yet ascended to heaven, so he was still in the outer court, right? Jesus could eat fish in the outer court. You see, folks, if we are worshiping in the outer court or even the holy place, we can have our clean meats and our fish, right? But right now, as we studied, Jesus is not in the outer court or holy place, right? And you can't get victory over sin in the outer court or holy place. Where is Jesus now? In the most holy place. You have to be where Jesus is to overcome sin, right? You have to follow him to the most holy place. And in the most holy place, on the antitypical Day of Atonement, you have to put away clean meats, including fish, so he can cleanse you from all your sins. All right, let's go to the screen. Let's read what this says.
Flesh was never the best food, but its use is now doubly objectionable since disease in animals is so rapidly increasing. Animals are becoming more and more diseased, and it will not be long until animal food will be discarded by many besides Seventh-day Adventists. Foods that are healthful and life-sustaining are to be prepared so that men and women will not need to eat meat.
On diet and food, page 380. All right, thank you. All right, this, my brothers and sisters, is a prophecy, all right, because it says flesh foods will be discarded by many besides Seventh-day Adventists, right? This is a prophecy. Now, has anybody ever seen the documentary called What the Health on YouTube or Netflix? I think it came out somewhere around 2017, right? Now, in this documentary, the health risks of meat eating is exposed by doctors and other health experts. They also show the health benefits of eating a whole food, plant-based diet. Now, none of the persons featured in this documentary were Seventh-day Adventists, right? So I have to ask the question, have the children of the world become wiser than the children of light? Now, in this documentary, they also expose the corruption by governments, the medical fraternity, industry, the media, and even academia to deceive people concerning this issue, to get them to continue eating meat. It tells of how they would fund studies that show that meat is essential for you, or studies that discredit a plant-based diet. It's a very interesting documentary. I recommend that you check it out if you haven't done so already. You see, Jesus knew this in advance before it happened. That's why he's telling us these things. He's telling us these things in advance to protect us. Isn't he loving? Yes, he is loving. Now let's turn our Bibles now to the book of Genesis. Genesis chapter 1 and verse 29.
And God said, Behold, I have given you every herb bearing seed, which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree in the which is the fruit of a tree yielding seed. To you it shall be for meat.
Thank you. This is God's original plan for our diet, right? When we were sinless, when we were in his image, right? So there is a particular diet associated with the restoration to the image of God in man, right? You see, folks, this is the issue. Restoration to sinlessness, restoration to the image of God, right? Now, remember we said that this is one of the issues of the gospel, whether we can be restored to the image of God and keep his commandments. You see, folks, this is why Satan is trying so hard to keep us on meat, right? Right? Now, from what we studied, what should our diet be if we are following Jesus? It should be plant-based. So when you break it down, the question of meat eating is all about whether you are following Jesus or not, right? Let's go to the screen. See what this says.
Again and again, I have been shown that God is trying to lead us back, step by step, to his original design, that man should subsist upon the natural products of the earth.
All right, so what was God's original plan for man's diet? It is a plant-based diet. So the prophet saying the same thing that the Bible said, right? So therefore, a restoration to God's original design necessitates a return to a plant-based diet. All right, so we're gonna go back to the screen, right? See what this says here. Temperance, page 14, paragraph 1.
Satan comes to man as he came to Christ, with his overpowering temptations to indulge appetite. He well knows his power to overcome man upon this point. He overcame Adam and Eve upon appetite, and they lost their blissful home. What accumulated misery and crime have filled our world in consequence of the fall of Adam? Entire cities have been blotted from the face of the earth because of the debasing crimes and revolting iniquity that made them a blot upon the universe. Indulgence of appetite was the foundation of all their sins.
All right. So do we see here that Satan brought the same temptation of appetite to Christ? Yes. This was the first temptation that he brought to Christ in the wilderness, right? We saw that earlier in Matthew 4, 1-4, right? And of course, as we saw, Christ overcame it, right? Now, question. If he brought this temptation to Adam and Eve, and he brought it to Christ himself, do you think he might just try the same thing on you too? Now, you see, we saw just now that just as temperance is the foundation of all graces from God, what is the foundation of all sins of the people mentioned above? Indulgence in appetite. Which of these foundations are you laying? It's a question for each one to answer. All right. Let's go to the screen.
Vegetables, fruits, and grains should compose our diet. Not an ounce of flesh meat should enter our stomachs. The eating of flesh is unnatural. We are to return to God's original purpose in the creation of man.
Comes from Counsels on Diet and Food, page 380, paragraph 2. Thank you for that. All right. All right, now, based on what we just read there just now, right? Can we have, just a little meat now and then? No. Prophet says not an ounce, right? What should we be eating instead? Vegetables, fruits, and grains, right? All right. Now, let's go back to the screen. Let's read what this says.
Those who have received instruction regarding the evils of the use of flesh foods, tea and coffee, and rich and unhealthy food preparations, and who are determined to make a covenant with God by sacrifice, will not continue to indulge their appetite for food that they know to be unhealthful. God demands that the appetite be cleansed and that self-denial be practiced in regard to those things which are not good. This is a work that will have to be done before his people can stand before him, a perfected people.
Appetites have to be cleansed, right? Thanks for that. Counsels on Diet and Food, page 381, paragraph 2. All right. All right, so what has to be done before God's people can stand perfect before him? Self-denial in diet. Putting away of the things that might taste nice, but are harmful to our bodies. Things like meat, eggs, cheese, ice cream, etc., right? Jesus says, if any man will come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross daily and follow me. This is a necessary step that cannot be skipped if we want to be restored to the image of God, if we want to be sinless. Right? Now, somebody might ask, well, what's so bad about meat? Well, it tastes nice, right? Isn't that good enough? All right. Let's go to Numbers chapter 11, verses 33 and 34.
And while the flesh was yet between their teeth, ere it was chewed, the wrath of the Lord was kindled against the people, and the Lord smote the people with a very great plague. And he called the name of that place Kibroth-hattaavah, because there they buried the people that lusted.
They buried the people that lusted. That place was Kibroth-hattaavah, right? Now, what were the people lusting after? They were lusting after flesh, as we saw before, right? Now, let us look at 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 5 and 6.
But with many of them, God was not well pleased, for they were overthrown in the wilderness. Now, these things were for our examples, to the intent we should not lust after evil things as they also lusted.
Thank you. Now, what are the evil things that the people lusted after? flesh, right? The prophet said earlier that flesh eating is evil, right? Now here we're seeing the same thing in the Bible, right? Right? The evil thing that if people were lusting after was flesh, right? Now, why would it be evil? 1 Peter 2 and verse 11.
Dearly beloved, I beseech you, as strangers and pilgrims, abstain from fleshly lusts which war against the soul.
Right. Now, from what we saw just now, is meat a fleshly lust? Yes. From what we saw in this verse that we just looked at, what do fleshly lusts do? They war against the soul, right? Now, according to Genesis 2:7, the soul is composed of the body and spirit, or breath of life, right? So therefore, if flesh foods are warring against the soul, then it means that it is damaging to both one's physical and spiritual life and brings our physical and spiritual natures into conflict with each other. Does a flesh diet do this? Let's go to the screen.
The Word of God plainly warns us that unless we abstain from fleshly lusts, the physical nature will be brought into conflict with the spiritual nature. Lustful eating wars against health and peace. Thus, a warfare is instituted between the higher and the lower attributes of the man. The lower propensities, strong and active, oppress the soul. The highest interests of the being are imperiled by the indulgence of appetites unsanctioned by heaven.
It is on that on fourth page 382, paragraph 4. Thank you. All right. Now, what is the highest interest of the being? It would be to be restored to the image of God, right? There's no other interest that is higher than that, right? Now, we saw earlier that this is imperiled by a flesh diet, right? How could this be, right? Let's go to the screen again. Counsels on that on food, page 382, paragraph 3.
Those who indulge in meat eating, tea drinking, and gluttony are sowing seeds for a harvest of pain and death. The unhealthful food placed in the stomach strengthens the appetites that war against the soul, developing the lower propensities. A diet of flesh meat tends to develop animalism. A development of animalism lessens spirituality, rendering the mind incapable of understanding truth.
Serious stuff there. Thank you. All right. Now, what effect do we see the flesh diet having here? It lessens spirituality, rendering the mind incapable of understanding truth. Right? Now let's turn our Bibles to 1 Peter 1 and verse 22.
Seeing you have purified your souls in obeying the truth through the Spirit unto unfeigned love of the brethren, see that you love one another with a pure heart fervently.
All right, thank you. Now, if the mind is incapable of understanding truth, will you be able to obey it intelligently? No, right? And if you're unable to obey truth, will your soul be purified? No, right? Now, if you or anyone you know have difficulty grasping Bible truths, especially some of the more testing ones, check the diet, right? Now, has anybody ever tried to explain a Bible truth to someone and you break it down text by text, precept upon precept, line upon line, right? And at the end of the study, they say, well, that's just your opinion. Check the diet. All right, let's go to the screen for the last time.
Intemperance of any kind benumbs the perceptive organs, and so weakens the brain nerve power that eternal things are not appreciated, but placed upon a level with the common. The higher powers of the mind, designed for elevated purposes, are brought into slavery to the baser passions. If our physical habits are not right, our mental and moral powers cannot be strong, for great sympathy exists between the physical and the moral.
Thank you for that. It's on that full page 32 paragraph. All right. Now, if eternal things are placed on a level with the common, then what effect does intemperate diet have on our spiritual discernment? It damages it, right? You see, this is why the people will say, well, that's your opinion, right? Because Bible truth is placed on the same level as the opinions of men, right? Now, the last text that we're going to look at today is from the book of Philippians. That's Philippians chapter 3, verses 18 and 19.
For many more, of whom I have told you often, and now tell you even weeping, that they are the enemies of the cross of Christ, whose end is destruction, whose God is their belly, and whose glory is in their shame, who mind earthly things.
Thank you for that, Sister White. You see, brothers and sisters, when we put our bellies over what the Word of God says, our belly is our God, right? And when our God is our belly, we are enemies of the cross of Christ, right? No matter how much we say we're praying and how much we say we read our Bibles, no matter how much we say we are getting closer to God, we are enemies of the cross of Christ if our God is our belly. All right, so that is going to be the end of our study today. And I hope that you found this study edifying. May God continue to bless and keep you. So long.